Donald Trump created a firestorm Monday by stating that he, as president, has absolute authority to reopen the states for business. Although he's backed away from that since, he'll tell states to end their stay-at-home orders. He seems to still insist he has the authority to do that. Well, we can't get a better legal read on this than Alan Dershowitz, constitutional scholar, Harvard Law School professor emeritus, and best-selling author. His newest book is Guilt by Association, The Challenge of Proving Innocence in the Age of Me Too. All right, let's get right to it, Alan. No one knows better than you. The 10th Amendment, who's right?
Well, it's a very complicated issue. First of all, Larry, thanks for having me on. And the name of my book is Guilt by Accusation. Accusation, because the thesis of the book is you're guilty if you're just accused. Then I've made it available now, free on Kindle. You said guilt by association, which a lot of people say. It's similar, but it's guilt by accusation. Now let's get to the 10th Amendment. There's no question that under the 10th Amendment, the framers of our Bill of Rights said that any powers not specifically given to the federal government are reserved to the states and the people. That suggests a division of power and our system of federalism. Both governors have power, presidents have power. If there is a conflict, and if the Constitution authorizes the federal government to act, then under the Supremacy Clause of the Constitution, federal government prevails over state government. But it has to be authorized by the Constitution. So let's talk specifically about the virus. If you have a situation, say, for example, when there is a hurricane on the coast, and the governor says, I'm closing everything down. The governor prevails there because it's regional, it's local. But the virus doesn't respect state boundaries. So if you actually had a pandemic that was covering the entire United States, that would allocate powers to the president. The president could shut everything down at that point. Who has the power to reopen is a much more complicated question. But the short answer is the president does not have total authority. It's divided 6 ways, basically. 3 ways in the federal government, that is judicial, executive, and legislature, and then that's multiplied by 2 when you have federal versus state. He is the most powerful of the 6 units, but he is subject to checks and balances, ultimately by the Supreme Court.
So how do we resolve this?
Well, it's on a case-by-case basis. If, for example, a governor says, I'm not reopening the schools, and the president says you have to reopen the schools, the governor wins. Governor wins. Schools are much more appropriately handled on a local basis. On the other hand, if the president says, I'm not allowing reopening of airlines, the president wins because airlines are national and international. So it really depends on the issue. There's no simple yes or no answer to who has the power.
You were involved in the impeachment process. Has anyone in government or otherwise asked you to be involved here?
I get calls occasionally just for advice, but I am not the president's lawyer. I'm just an ordinary citizen. I did make the argument against impeachment in the Senate. But if a president calls me, any president, I give them advice. And occasionally presidents have called me for advice. And I've been asked my advice on some aspects of the virus and federal power.
Where do you think this is going to go? Do you think Trump will stay backed off? Do you think he'll try to go? Where do we go? To Supreme Court? What do we do?
Well, I think the big issue that's coming up is going to be whether we have an election in 2020. We have to have an election. Wisconsin taught us a lesson. You can't make people choose between their health and their right to vote. So we have to begin planning now for how to have an election in the event the virus gets worse. And the worst case scenario would be, what if it gets so bad that the post office can't continue to operate? Then we wouldn't be able to have ballots by mail. We wouldn't be able to have in-person voting. Computers, there's no law today in most states authorizing computer voting. So we'd be in a real dilemma. The one thing that's clear under the 20th Amendment is president's term ends January 20th, sharp at noon. Nothing extends that term. So if there's no new election, President Trump ceases to be the president at that point. And then we go into a very convoluted mechanism for how to pick the replacement president. And it's extremely complex, especially because if there's no election, there won't be a House of Representatives. There would be 2/3 of the Senate. So you couldn't have the Speaker of the House become the president. There would be no Speaker of the House. You couldn't have the President pro temp because the President pro temp right now is a Republican. But if there were 2/3 of the Senate left, they would be a majority of Democrats, and then they would pick the President pro temp. It's unbelievably complicated. Let's make sure we have the election on November, the date specified by Congress.
Can you possibly see all this happening, though?
Look, I'm a law professor. Law professors specialize in hypotheticals, so we have to deal with every hypothetical possibility. The likelihood is the virus will be controlled enough in November so that we can have our usual voting. Our usual voting, by the way, is most people vote at the polls, but an increasing number of people in an increasing number of states vote by mail. I vote by mail generally because I'm often out of town or traveling. And so I hope we'll be able to have elections on schedule. And there will be some conflicts about what businesses can open and when and who has the ultimate authority. The president indicated yesterday that he would, or has indicated recently, that he would work with governors on openings. And that's the way it should be. You should have cooperative federalism. Nobody should be able to use this pandemic to their partisan political advantage. And we should have as little restriction on civil liberties as at all possible. Let me give you an example. Church services. So you can't really allow people to go into mega churches or synagogues and have 1,500 people join together. But if people want to have a service where they're in their car at a drive-in in front of the church or in a drive-in movie which is taken over by the church, that seems reasonable. And the Constitution should give deference to religious observances under the First Amendment if it can be done consistent with protecting health.
Do you question his right to leave the World Health Organization?
Oh, absolutely not. Of course he has the right to do that. Congress probably can say something about it. Remember, Nikki Haley, who is, I think, widely respected, has also been quite critical of the World Health Organization and its many biases. But I think whatever money is taken from the World Health Organization should be given to the CDC, to American health organizations. It shouldn't be just put back in the budget. It should be allocated to healthcare that deals effectively with preventing this virus. The World Health Organization did not perform in a distinguished capacity at the beginning of this pandemic, and it didn't deal with the China problem in the most appropriate manner.
I have my right to privacy. Can there be a time, Alan, where I'm about to board a plane and the airport or the airplane company can take my temperature?
Yes. They can condition going on an airplane on your being willing to take the temperature. I happened to be in Turkey when this thing all broke out. I was with my wife and my daughter and my future son-in-law. And we were in Turkey, and before we get on the airlines there, they took our temperature. They didn't do it by putting anything in my mouth. They just ran something past my forehead. They do it I was in Israel before that. They do it in Israel. Look, Israel is a democracy, and Prime Minister Netanyahu shut it down, wouldn't allow people even to have seders with people who are not members of their family. The president of Israel was criticized because he invited his daughter to come to his seder. He's a widower, and he was all alone. So, democracies can be very tough, and if they're tough, they can be effective, and we have to make sure we always strike the balance. What's unacceptable is for partisans to use this to try to promote their own partisan agenda. For example, trying to shut down abortion clinics. That's outrageous. People who have the need for abortion have to be able to go to a clinic and get it. It's time sensitive, it's urgent. And if abortion is a constitutional right, people who are opposed to abortion shouldn't be using this pandemic as a way of furthering their own partisan or ideological agenda.
Alan, is it, when we deal with this Constitution, and you deal with it all the time, is this tough dealing with? There are so many examples where you can give one side or the other. Isn't it hard?
Absolutely. It's very, very hard. It was Tom Paine who said, "These are the times that try men's and women's souls." Oliver Wendell Holmes said, hard cases make bad law. We're in a testing situation. Our Constitution has endured for longer than any other Constitution in the history of the world, and it will endure this. But it has to strike a balance. It has to strike a balance between privacy, between the right of people to congregate for religious purposes, the right to protest government actions, and the need for public health. Historically, we've done a pretty good job. We never did what many other countries did, fell into the allure of fascism or communism during times of crisis. We haven't always been perfect. And some liberal presidents have been less than perfect. President Roosevelt confined 110,000 Americans of Japanese origin in detention centers. That was an abysmal abuse of due process. President Lincoln suspended the writ of habeas corpus. We haven't been perfect, but we've never given in to authoritarianism or tyranny the way France did, the way Germany did, the way Italy did, the way Spain did, the way Chile did, the way Argentina did. We have had a very good record of standing up to tyranny even in times of crisis, and we will do the same now. So I don't worry for our country. The Constitution is being tested. It will pass the test.
Alan, as always, great talking with you. And the book is Guilt by Accusation.
Right, and it's free on Kindle. If you're home alone or with your family, just press the button. It's free.
Thank you, Alan.
Thank you.